My sister raised her champagne glass, smiled at the 100 guests in our mother's ballroom, and said the only reason I was still single was because no honest man wanted a woman who kept receipts on everyone. People laughed. I did too, right, until I asked the valet to dim the lights and played a video she had never seen, one that made her fiancé go white. Before the truth lands, tell me where you are watching from, tap like, subscribe, and stay with me through the fallout. My name is Nora Whitaker, and until the night my sister tried to humiliate me in front of half of Savannah, I still believed family embarrassment was survivable. I no longer believe that. The party was supposed to celebrate my younger sister Isabel and her engagement to Grant Holloway, a polished real estate developer with expensive shoes, a dazzling smile, and the kind of voice that made older women trust him instantly. Our mother, Colleen, had been planning the event for weeks inside the ballroom of the Whitaker house, the old mansion my grandmother built when my grandfather was still alive, and the Whitaker name still meant stability instead of appearances. Everything in our family had become appearances. Isabel had always been the golden daughter. She was beautiful in a way people described before they mentioned her character. She floated through rooms like she owned the air itself. Teachers forgave her late assignments. Men forgave her lies. My mother forgave every broken promise before the words even left her mouth. If I earned something, Isabel deserved equal praise. If she took something, it was because she needed support. If I objected, I was bitter. By the time I was 36, the family version of me had been polished into a neat little insult: capable, cold, unmarried, intimidating, difficult. Useful, but never cherished. I was the person who paid emergency tax bills without being asked. I was the one who reorganized the books for my father's building supply company after his mild stroke left him too exhausted to catch what his managers missed. I drove him to appointments, reviewed vendor contracts at night, and quietly paid the property insurance on Whitaker House twice when my mother forgot, and then pretended the notices had never come. Isabel, meanwhile, posted soft focus photos about gratitude, hosted charity luncheons with other women who had never balanced a payroll in their lives, and told people she was helping run the family legacy. The truth was uglier. 3 months before the engagement party, our company controller resigned with no warning. His name was Leonard Price, and in 20 years of working for my father, he had never once left early. Then, one Thursday afternoon, he came into my office, set down a manila envelope, and said very quietly, "I cannot sign off on what they are asking me to sign off on." I asked him who he meant. He hesitated. "Your mother. Your sister. And that fiancé of hers who keeps showing up like he belongs here." Then he slid the envelope toward me and walked out without taking his severance papers. Inside were copies of wire transfers, revised vendor invoices, 2 property valuation reports, and a handwritten note in Leonard's blocky print: "Check the lake parcel. Check the emergency line of credit. Someone is moving assets." At first, I thought it was sloppiness. My mother was terrible with details, and Isabel treated paperwork like an insult. But sloppiness does not create layered transfers through shell vendors. Sloppiness does not produce duplicate signatures on board authorizations that were never discussed at meetings. Sloppiness does not quietly shift company-backed collateral onto a family property no one was supposed to touch. The lake parcel was a 40-acre tract outside Bluffton that my grandmother had placed in a trust years ago. She used to say it was the only thing in the family that had not been poisoned by ego. I used to spend summers there. Isabel hated the place because there was no cell signal strong enough for her friends. I loved it because the silence did not ask me to perform. When I pulled the trust records, my stomach went cold. The parcel had been pledged as collateral against a private line of credit opened 6 weeks earlier. The authorization page contained my father's electronic signature, but the timestamp showed it had been executed while he was in physical therapy, with no access to his laptop. The secondary consent line bore my mother's name. The supporting resolution referenced board approval that never happened. Then I found the invoices. A landscaping company billed the business for decorative stone and drainage work that had never been delivered. A staging firm charged for inventory that did not exist. A consulting fee had been paid to a brand strategy company registered to a mailbox address in Atlanta. The mailing contact tied back to Grant. I sat at my desk until long after the office emptied, reviewing each line item with the growing nausea of someone realizing the betrayal is not a single act. It is a system. It is a rhythm. It is people you fed and covered for and defended, deciding your competence makes you easier to exploit. The next morning, I brought the documents to my father. He read the first 3 pages in silence. Then he set them down and rubbed his face. "I'm tired, Nora." I stared at him. "They forged your approval." He did not deny it. Instead, he said, "Your sister is getting married. Let us not explode the family over bookkeeping." Bookkeeping. That was when I understood the danger was bigger than Isabel's vanity. My father knew enough to be afraid, but not enough to stop it. My mother, on the other hand, looked me dead in the eye over Sunday lunch and called me paranoid. "You always do this," she said, dabbing her lipstick with a linen napkin. "The moment something good happens for Isabel, you start sniffing around for reasons to ruin it." I put the copied transfers on the table between us. "This is not a feeling. It is fraud." Isabel leaned back in her chair and smiled with pure contempt. "You know what your problem is. You think being the responsible one makes you the moral one." "No," I said. "I think forging signatures makes you a criminal." Grant laughed. Not loudly, not nervously. He laughed like a man who had been getting away with things for years. My mother pushed the papers aside without reading them properly. "Your sister has finally found a man who adores her, and you cannot stand that your life looks smaller next to hers." That sentence would have destroyed me once, but by then, I had already started building a private file. I checked the company security logs. Grant had visited the office after hours more than a dozen times in 2 months, always under Isabel's guest access. I pulled archived emails and found drafts deleted from shared folders. I reviewed accounting edits and saw that several entries were altered from my mother's home network. There were also unexplained transfers from a dormant maintenance account into a temporary escrow holding structure I had never approved. Then came the worst part. The Whitaker house itself had been quietly assessed for leverage. Not sold, not yet, but prepared. My mother had been moving documents from the home safe into a banker's box and telling staff she was organizing family papers. She was separating deeds, trust amendments, and insurance riders, and at least 2 files were missing. One was the original restriction letter my grandmother wrote about the lake parcel. The other was the addendum naming me successor trustee if any family-held property was used without unanimous consent. That was not a coincidence. That was motive. Still, I did not confront them immediately. I waited because I needed proof that could not be dismissed as jealousy or bitterness or what my mother liked to call my single woman intensity. I hated that phrase most because of how often I had tried to outrun it. I had dated. I had loved. I had even been engaged once years earlier until my former fiancé told me he admired my ambition but did not want to come second to my responsibilities. He meant my family. He was not wrong. I had spent too much of my life cleaning up after people who called my loyalty cold because it came in the form of labor instead of applause. Isabel knew exactly where that bruise was. In the weeks before the engagement party, she sharpened herself against it. She sent me bridal mood boards with captions about soulmates. She announced in front of friends that she was praying I would someday let a man love me instead of auditing him. At one dinner, she squeezed my hand and said with fake concern, "Do you ever worry you missed your window?" My mother smiled into her wine glass. Even then, I might have kept gathering evidence quietly, if not for one thing Leonard had mentioned on his way out the door. "Check the valet vendor," he had said. They used the same name twice. At first, I did not understand what that meant. Then I realized the event company billing our engagement party was also one of the shell vendors receiving funds from the business. The contract had been padded beyond market rate, the staffing numbers inflated, and the deposit routed through a management intermediary linked to Grant's development office. They were using the engagement party to wash money while flaunting it. That was when I made my decision. If Isabel wanted an audience, I would give her one. I hired an independent forensic accountant named Tessa Monroe under a confidentiality agreement so strict it read like a federal security file. Tessa was all sharp eyes and calm sentences. She did not overreact. She did not soothe me. She simply reviewed everything and said, "This is coordinated. Your sister is reckless, your mother is entitled, and the fiancé is the operator. If you move too early, they will destroy the trail. So what do I do?" She closed the folder. "Let them think you are only hurt." That advice changed everything. I stopped pushing. I stopped arguing at family dinners. I let my mother assume she had won. I let Isabel taunt me. I even let Grant explain one falsified invoice to me as if I were too emotional to understand temporary liquidity structuring. Then 4 nights before the engagement party, a housekeeper named Marisol knocked on my office door after everyone had left. She held out a flash drive. "I found this in the upstairs den television console," she whispered. "Mrs. Whitaker told me to throw away anything left there after Sunday. I thought you should see it first." I plugged it into my laptop. What came up was a backup export from one of the interior security cameras my father had forgotten, was still synced to the old server. The footage showed my mother, Isabel, and Grant in the den. There was no audio on the first clip, only images. Papers spread across the coffee table. My mother handing over a key envelope. Grant photographing documents. Isabel laughing as she tapped the folder labeled Lake Trust. Then a second clip appeared, one from a newer camera with audio enabled. And on that recording, my sister said the sentence that burned away the last of my hesitation. "Nora always saves us. That is her whole personality. If this blows up, everybody will assume she mishandled the books because she is the one at the office all the time." Grant replied, "Then keep pushing the lonely sister angle. Nobody trusts the woman with no life." My mother laughed, not a polite laugh, not discomfort, a deep approving laugh. That was the moment I stopped thinking about whether exposing them would break the family. The family had already been broken. I had just been the last one still pretending otherwise. The day of the engagement party arrived hot and bright, the kind of southern afternoon that makes flowers open too fast and people drink before they eat. By 5 o'clock, Whitaker House looked like a magazine spread designed by someone addicted to white roses and denial. My mother wore emerald silk and the expression of a woman who believed admiration was a birthright. Isabel floated through the ballroom in a fitted ivory dress that was not technically bridal, but close enough to announce the direction of her fantasy. Grant shook hands with contractors, investors, neighbors, and church friends like he had already inherited us. I came in wearing navy, no sequins, no softness, no apology. People noticed. Not because I was spectacular, but because I looked composed in a room built for performance. I greeted guests, helped one of the servers recover a dropped tray, checked on my father twice, and listened as 3 separate women asked if I was doing all right with that careful tone people use when they mean, "Are you jealous?" The answer was no. I was furious, calmly, deliberately furious. Tessa arrived 40 minutes in, not as my guest on paper, but as part of the event vendor review team I had insisted on overseeing after recent accounting irregularities. That phrase had annoyed my mother so much she nearly cracked a molar. She had wanted me far from logistics. Instead, I stood exactly where I could see the ballroom entrance, the terrace doors, and the portable projection system the event company had set up for a sentimental slideshow later in the evening. At 7 o'clock, champagne was poured. At 7:15, my mother tapped a spoon against her glass. She welcomed everyone, praised love, thanked God for family, and used the phrase blended blessings twice. Then she handed the microphone to Isabel. That was where the humiliation was supposed to happen. My sister had always preferred cruelty disguised as charm. She thanked our parents for believing in true partnership. She praised Grant for choosing a life built on warmth instead of transaction. Then she turned toward me with the practiced smile I had watched her weaponize since childhood. And of course, she said, "I want to thank my big sister Nora for teaching me what not to do if I ever wanted a happy relationship." Laughter fluttered through the room. She went on. She has always believed love should come with spreadsheets, legal disclaimers, and a quarterly performance review. So, if any of you are single tonight, please do not let her discourage you. There is still hope if you smile before requesting bank statements. More laughter. Louder now. My mother lowered her head, hiding her grin. Grant put a hand over his mouth to appear embarrassed, but his eyes were shining. He liked this. He liked watching me get pinned beneath the family narrative. Then Isabel lifted her champagne glass in my direction. The only reason Nora is still single, she said, is because no honest man wants a woman who keeps receipts on everyone. That line landed like she wanted it to. You could feel the room choose a side. Not cruelly, not all at once, but through that awful social reflex where people laugh because silence would require courage. I laughed too, not because it was funny, because the trap had sprung. I set down my glass and walked toward the event coordinator. "Would you mind dimming the lights for just a moment?" I asked pleasantly. She looked confused. "For the slideshow?" "Yes," I said. "For the family presentation." My mother straightened. "What presentation?" I picked up the wireless microphone. Just a small contribution from me. Since Isabel has shared so much about my personal life, I thought I would share something about our family life. My father stood halfway up from his chair. "Nora." I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I did not protect him from discomfort. "You should sit down." That was when the room changed, not yet into panic. First into attention. The lights dimmed. The projector glowed. The first image was not a childhood photo or a bridal collage. It was a still frame from the den camera my mother, Isabel, and Grant around the coffee table papers spread like cards before a con. Murmurs started immediately. Isabel laughed too quickly. "What is this?" I did not answer her. I looked at the screen operator and said, "Play the video with audio." Grant moved first, stepping toward the console. Tessa stepped into his path before he got there. Her voice was low and professional. "Do not touch that equipment." He blinked at her. "Who are you?" "Someone who already copied the files." The room went dead quiet. Then the video began. You could hear the den clock ticking in the recording. You could hear ice shift in a glass. You could hear my mother say very clearly, "Your father does not need to understand every document he signs." Several guests turned toward him in real time. On screen, Grant spread out the trust documents and said, "Once the lake parcel secures the line, we can move the debt off the development shell before close." Then Isabel, smiling the way she smiled whenever she thought somebody weaker was trapped, said, "Nora always saves us." That is her whole personality. If this blows up, everybody will assume she mishandled the books because she is the one at the office all the time. A woman near the front gasped out loud. "The video continued," Grant said. "Then keep pushing the lonely sister angle. Nobody trusts the woman with no life." My mother laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a "maybe this is too far" laugh. A delighted laugh. Then she added, "She will never expose us. She would rather die than embarrass the family." The recording ended. No one moved. Even the staff had frozen. The only sound in this ballroom was the faint hum of the projector fan and the cracking of whatever remained of my mother's social standing. Isabel found her voice first. "This is edited." "No," I said. "It is archived security footage from the house server. Time-stamped, backed up, independently authenticated." Grant tried a different angle. "This is a private family conversation. You had no right to show it." I almost admired the nerve. "You used forged approvals to leverage trust property, routed company funds through shell vendors, inflated event contracts, and prepared to blame me if the debt surfaced. Privacy is not the issue." My mother stood, her face gone pale with rage. "You vindictive little—" I cut across her. "Careful, there are bankers here." That line did what the video had started. Heads turned sharply toward the two regional lenders my mother had invited for status. One of them, Mr. Abernathy, looked like he had swallowed gravel. He knew exactly what he had heard. Isabel's voice rose. "You are doing this because you are jealous of what I asked." The fiancé who registered a fake consulting company to bill our business. The engagement party being used to launder padded vendor invoices. The plan to seize grandmother's lake parcel because pretending to be wealthy Got too expensive. That last sentence detonated. Guests began whispering openly now. Someone from church pulled out her phone. My cousin Meredith backed away from the front table like truth itself might stain her dress. Grant stepped toward me again, every bit of charm gone now. You are making allegations in public that you cannot prove. Tessa handed me a slim folder. I opened it and pulled out 3 copies of the forensic summary, then held them up. These are preliminary findings from an independent forensic review. Duplicate invoices, unauthorized transfers, falsified authorizations, shell vendor routing, and because I know everyone in this room has heard enough family squabbling to distrust emotion, I also sent a copy this afternoon to legal counsel. My father closed his eyes. He had hoped this would stay inside the house. He had mistaken silence for safety. Now he was watching the cost of that mistake arrive with interest. My mother turned to the guests and tried to gather herself into dignity. This is an internal misunderstanding. Nora has always been dramatic. A voice from the back said, that did not sound like a misunderstanding. It was Marisol. She should not have spoken. Staff were supposed to disappear into the elegance of events like this. But she stepped just inside the ballroom doors, shoulders shaking, and said, Mrs. Whitaker told me to throw away document copies after meetings. I did not know what they were, but I knew it was wrong. My mother stared at her like betrayal from below was somehow filthier than betrayal from blood. Isabel whirled toward Grant. Do something! There was nothing left for him to do. The worst thing about public exposure is that once people see the shape of truth, every old discomfort rearranges itself around it. Guests began remembering the contractor Grant had pressured the fundraiser expense that never matched the invoice the way my mother always changed the subject when property came up. Patterns rose to the surface in real time. The first major climax of the night was not my video. It was watching the family myth die in front of witnesses. But I was not finished. I walked to the projector and clicked to the next slide. Bank transfer map, vendor overlap chart, timeline of line of credit activity against the lake parcel. I spoke clearly, not for drama now, but for record. This began months ago. Company assets were manipulated. False vendor structures were used. Family trust property was leveraged without valid consent. My name was positioned to take blame if discovery occurred. I am making a formal accusation in front of witnesses that funds were misappropriated and legal documents were falsified. That was the sentence that changed this from scandal to event. Formal accusation. Public exposure. No going back. My father stood then, but not to defend them. He looked at Grant first. Did you forge my approval? Grant did not answer. That silence was answer enough. Then my father looked at Isabel, and I saw something in his face I had never seen before. Not wisdom, not courage. Shame. You knew. She started crying instantly. Isabel always cried when strategy failed. It was temporary, she said. We were fixing cash flow until the development closed. Nobody was going to lose anything. Nobody, except the business, the trust, my name, my future, my grandmother's land, my faith, and whatever scraps of loyalty were left in that room. I looked at the guests and lowered the microphone. I am sorry you had to see this at an engagement party, I said. But I was apparently invited to my own character assassination, and I prefer visual aids. Several people laughed then, but this time it was not laughter at me. It was the startled, sharp laughter of people witnessing a predator get dragged into daylight. That was when Grant did the thing guilty men do when they realize charm no longer works. He left, not fast enough to look panicked, not slow enough to look innocent. He headed for the terrace doors. Tessa was already on her phone. I knew she was alerting counsel and the financial institution contact she had prepped. He could walk out of the ballroom. He could not walk out of the evidence trail. Isabel reached for my arm as he disappeared. You have ruined my life. I looked at her hand on my sleeve, then at the red marks her nails were leaving. No, I said quietly. I just stopped volunteering mine. After the party imploded, the house did not empty the way houses usually do after humiliation. It fragmented. Some guests fled quickly, desperate to outrun association. Others lingered in clusters beneath chandeliers and on the terrace, pretending concern while collecting details they would later retell as if they had personally uncovered the scheme. My mother locked herself in the blue sitting room and refused to speak. Isabel disappeared upstairs with mascara tracks down her face. My father remained in the library motionless in his chair, one hand gripping the armrest, like the room might tilt if he let go. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow and terribly alert. Exposure is not justice. It is only the moment the ground opens. After that, everything unstable starts sliding. Tessa joined me near the service hallway with 2 coffees neither of us really wanted. "They are going to scramble tonight," she said. "Phones, emails, document destruction, blame shifting. This is the dangerous window." "I know." "No," she said very gently. "You know betrayal. This is different. This is preservation mode. People make larger mistakes when they panic." She was right. Within an hour, my mother's attorney had called and left a message accusing me of defamation. Isabel sent a text saying I had embarrassed a grieving father and traumatized her guests. Grant sent nothing, which was somehow worse. Silence from a man like him meant calculation. By midnight, I had taken the most important step of my adult life. I stopped trying to manage the emotional fallout and started building a war room. I moved into the old downstairs office at Whitaker House, the one my grandfather once used for timber contracts. Heavy desk-locked cabinets, no decorative nonsense. Tessa spread files across the surface while I called everyone who might matter. Not friends who liked me. Not cousins who loved gossip. People with leverage, discipline, and something to lose if fraud touched them too. That was how the alliance began. The first person who said yes was Reese Dalton, a litigation attorney I knew through a women in business board I had joined years earlier and never really had time to attend. Reese was precise, unsentimental, and allergic to performance. When I explained the forged authorizations, asset exposure, and potential misuse of trust property, she did not gasp or console me. She simply said, "Preserve every device. Nobody enters that home office alone. I am coming now." The second was Tessa's referral, Owen Mercer, a former banking compliance officer who had left corporate life after exposing a regional lending fraud ring. He had the exhausted face of a man who had spent too many years watching polished people justify theft. He agreed to review the line of credit trail and vendor layering first thing in the morning. The third was not someone I expected. My cousin Leah called just after 1 in the morning. Leah and I had never been close, mostly because she had learned early that survival in our family meant staying neutral around my mother. She was a school counselor in Charleston, careful with her words, and even more careful with Whitaker politics. But that night, her voice shook. "I was in the breakfast room 3 weeks ago," she said. "I heard Aunt Colleen telling Isabel that if the Lake papers were challenged, they could say your grandmother had promised the parcel to both daughters in spirit. She said written restrictions can be made to look confusing if the right pages disappear." I closed my eyes. Did anyone else hear it? "No, but I took a photo." My heart kicked hard. Of what? The box on the sideboard? The folders? I did not know why at the time. It just felt wrong. She sent it while we were still on the phone. The image was simple. A banker's box, half-open labels, visible trust files stacked beside a portable shredder. One tab read, "Successor Trustee." Another read, "Lake Restrictions." Both were later missing from the safe inventory. It was not enough on its own to win a case, but it was enough to prove intentional handling of the exact documents they later denied touching. The alliance deepened by morning. Reese arrived with legal pads, secure evidence bags, and a paralegal named Devin, who moved like he had caffeine in his veins instead of blood. Tessa started reconciling the event vendor payments against company withdrawals. Owen built a compliance timeline showing when the credit facility had been opened, when collateral documents were uploaded, and which approval layers had been bypassed. Leah agreed to write a statement. Then something happened that made the room go silent. My father walked in carrying a leather folio. He looked 20 years older than he had at dinner. "I do not know if this helps," he said. Inside the folio were his handwritten notes from physical therapy dates, including appointment times that directly overlapped with the electronic execution on the forged consent form. There was also a printed email he had never sent drafted the week before, addressed to my mother. "Colleen," it read, "I do not want the Bluffton land touched under any circumstances. Your mother made her position clear. Nora will understand the trust language better than either of us, so leave the documents where they are." He never sent it because, in his words, I was tired of fighting in my own home. I wanted to scream at him for that. For every year he had mistaken passivity for peace. For every time he let my mother praise Isabel for charm and use me for labor. For every warning he folded into silence because confrontation made him uncomfortable. Instead, I asked, "Will you sign a statement?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he said yes. That yes mattered more than I let him see. Not because I forgave him. I did not. Not yet. But because the architecture of favoritism only collapses when someone inside it finally stops pretending not to see the beams. By noon, Reese had filed notice to freeze further encumbrance activity related to the lake parcel pending dispute review. Owen had flagged the lender with a compliance concern serious enough to stall additional movement. Tessa identified at least 4 fabricated or inflated vendor channels. Devin set up a privilege wall so any new evidence would be routed and logged correctly. And then the emotional pressure began. My mother emerged from the blue sitting room dressed for battle, hair flawless, pearl earrings. Rage sharpened into respectability. She did not look at Reese or Tessa. She looked only at me. "You have brought strangers into this house to destroy your sister." "No," I said. "You invited a criminal into this family to destroy me." Her expression hardened. "Everything I have done has been to preserve what your father built." "That is a lie." She stepped closer. "Do you know what people say about unmarried women your age in this city? They say you become possessive, that you mistake control for love because you have no family of your own." The old wound, again, as if the absence of a husband erased the years I spent carrying theirs. Reese closed her folder very softly. "Mrs. Whitaker, if you continue attempting to intimidate my client, I will add witness interference to my list of concerns." My mother turned to her in disbelief, as if the simple fact of my retaining competent help was its own betrayal. "This is a family matter." Reese did not blink. Fraud often is. That sentence bought me a breath of peace. "Not much, just enough." Over the next several days, the Alliance network expanded in directions I had not anticipated. Leonard Price agreed to cooperate formally after Reese assured him he would not be left exposed alone. A junior bookkeeper named Anika admitted she had been instructed by Isabel to reclassify party expenditures under vendor development and not bother Nora because she overreacts. The event company owner, once confronted with documentation, confessed that Grant had proposed using layered billing because family events always get messy anyway. Each new piece tightened the web. But alliances are not built only through shared evidence. They are built through emotional recognition, through the terrifying relief of hearing someone say you are not imagining it. Late one evening, Leah stayed after the others left and sat on the office sofa with her shoes off legs tucked under her. "You know, she said I believed them about you for years." I looked up from the trust file. "That I was cold, that you made everything harder. That Isabel was easier to love." The honesty hit me harder than pity would have. She continued, "Then I watched you cleaning up after every holiday disaster, every unpaid bill, every lie. You were never hard. You were just the only person not floating." I had no immediate answer for that. Nobody in my family had ever said it so plainly. Outside the office window, the grounds of Whitaker House glowed under garden lights my mother insisted made the place look timeless. Inside, the truth had finally started catching up to the furniture. Still, the conflict was escalating faster than our evidence could move. Grant resurfaced through lawyers, not apologies. He denied ownership of the consulting shell and claimed any company benefiting him was established by administrative error. Isabel posted a vague message online about private pain caused by jealous people who weaponize vulnerability. My mother started calling older family friends, framing me as mentally overwhelmed from loneliness and work strain. 2 of my aunts stopped answering my calls. The old family machine was fighting back. Smear. Isolate. Sentimentalize. Rewrite. Classic. That was when Owen brought in another angle. He had spent years inside regional lending systems and understood something. I did not fraud survives because respectable institutions hate admitting they missed it. If we wanted real movement, we needed not just evidence of wrongdoing, but pressure on the people who had looked the other way. So we built a secondary alliance. Not family, not friends, external accountability. A local investigative journalist named April Gaines had been reporting on development corruption along the coastal corridor for years. Reese did not want to go public too soon, but she agreed that if the lender tried to bury the issue, a documented pattern of relationship-based underwriting could matter. April would not publish anything yet, but she agreed to review background material under embargo. Then there was Reverend Thomas, our family church pastor. I did not contact him for spiritual comfort. I contacted him because my mother had been using church language to shield misconduct, and several donors in the room at the engagement party trusted him more than they trusted courts. I wanted one thing from him, a written acknowledgement that he had personally heard my mother refer to the lake parcel as Nora's stewardship headache months earlier, which contradicted her new claim that she never knew I had formal trust authority. He gave it, quietly, without drama, but he gave it. Every alliance added pressure. Every statement made retreat harder for them. Every witness shifted the center of gravity away from my mother's curated version of reality. And somewhere in the middle of all that legal motion and emotional debris, a different kind of truth surfaced. I was not alone because I had failed at love. I was alone because I had been raised inside a structure that rewarded my usefulness and punished my boundaries. That realization did not heal me. It did not make the nights easier, or the betrayal smaller, or the image of my mother laughing on that screen any less corrosive. But it changed the shape of my fear. For the first time in my life, I stopped worrying that exposing my family would leave me with no one. Instead, I started noticing who stepped forward once the pretending ended. Tessa, who ordered food when I forgot to eat. Reese, who turned legal strategy into a form of protection. Leah, who risked being iced out by half the family to tell the truth. Marisol, who had every reason to stay invisible and still handed me the flash drive. Even my father, weak and late and imperfect, who finally signed his statement with a hand that shook but did not stop. The middle of the story is where suspense lives, because it is where victory still looks reversible. And ours was. We had momentum. We had witnesses. We had a freeze action on the property. We had enough evidence to terrify honest people and anger guilty ones. But the kind of family that builds itself on favoritism does not collapse cleanly. It splinters. It bargains. It picks a sacrificial daughter and hopes the old pattern still holds. By the end of that week, I had built an alliance network stronger than anything my mother expected. What I did not yet know was that one person inside that network had already begun leaking pieces of our strategy. And when that betrayal surfaced, it would not just wound the case. It would put everything I had saved at risk. I found out one of us was leaking information the same way I found out most ugly truths in my family. Not through confession, but through timing that made innocence impossible. 3 days after Reese filed the preservation notice and Owen flagged the lender, Grant's legal team responded with an argument they should not have been able to make yet. Buried inside their filing was a precise reference to a draft compliance memo Owen had only circulated to 5 people. The wording was almost identical, right down to an internal phrase he liked to use about layered reputational shielding. When Reese read it, her whole face went still. "They have a source," she said. Nobody spoke for a moment. Tessa looked up from the dining room table we had turned into an overflow workspace. "It could be hacked." Owen shook his head. "Not this quickly. Not this specifically. This was shared." The room tightened around that word, shared. Not stolen from outside, handed over from inside. I looked at the people around the table and hated that my first instinct was not disbelief. It was exhaustion. Betrayal had become so native to the air around me that even alliance now came with a shadow. Reese began narrowing the circle at once. Her paralegal cross-checked outgoing drafts, timestamps, and recipient patterns. Tessa reviewed file access. Owen locked down every shared document and moved the active case materials onto a segmented system with limited permissions. By evening, we had reduced the leak window to one person. Leah. I did not want it to be Leah. Of everyone who had stepped forward, she was the one I had led into the emotional center of the fight. She had not only provided the photograph of the banker's box, she had sat with me late into the night when the house felt poisoned. She had told me she regretted believing the family story about me. She had looked relieved, even proud, to finally speak plainly. So when Reese asked me to call her in for a conversation, my chest felt strangely numb. Leah arrived just after sunset, still in work clothes, with her hair pinned back loosely and worry already in her eyes. She must have sensed something from my voice. What happened? Reese did not circle the point. A protected memo was referenced by opposing counsel. We have traced the exposure window. Leah looked from Reese to me. You think it was me? No one answered immediately. That silence told her enough. Her face drained. Then, to my horror, tears filled her eyes before denial ever came. That was when I knew. Leah, I said quietly. Tell me the truth now. She sat down without being asked. I did not give them everything. Those words hit harder than a full denial would have. I felt something inside me go cold and orderly. Why? She pressed both hands over her mouth for a second, then dropped them into her lap. Aunt Colleen came to see me. Of course she did. She said if this went public, the whole family would be ruined. She said my father's business line would get reviewed because the bank would start looking at all connected accounts. She said you were angry and not thinking clearly, and that if I just told them what direction you were taking, they could settle quietly before everything exploded. I stared at her. So you sold me for peace? Leah flinched. I was trying to stop a disaster. You were trying to stop consequences. Her tears spilled faster now. You do not understand. My father is already struggling. My son is applying to college next year. We cannot survive a scandal tied to the family name. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny left in me. This scandal did not come from me. I know that now. No, I said sharper. You knew it before. That is what makes it betrayal. The room stayed still around us. Reese made notes. Tessa watched Leah with a kind of furious disappointment I recognized, because I felt it too. Owen looked more tired than angry, as if human weakness had once again confirmed his worst expectations. Leah twisted her wedding ring. I only told Aunt Colleen that Owen was looking at the lender path and that you were preparing formal escalation. I did not send documents, I swear. Reese slid a printout across the table. Then explain this. It was a phone log summary. Leah had exchanged 6 calls with a number registered to a legal assistant in Grant's office the day before the filing. Her shoulders collapsed. I thought they just wanted to understand how far you were going. And did they offer you anything I asked? That was when shame moved across her face in a way that finally looked honest. Aunt Colleen said she would help my father refinance the Charleston property if I calmed things down. There it was. Not ideology, not fear alone. Money wrapped in family language. The oldest poison in our bloodline. I stood and walked to the window because if I stayed where I was, I might have said something I could not take back. Outside, the oak trees along the drive were lit from below. Dramatic and expensive, my mother's favorite kind of beauty. The house still looked grand from a distance. But now I knew where the cracks were, knew how much rot elegance could hide. Behind me, Leah whispered, I am sorry. I turned. No, you are frightened. That is not the same thing. She started crying harder. Please, do not cut me off. Please. I came forward. I helped. You helped until the family offered you the same old deal. Protect the system, and maybe it will spare you. My voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. Reese cleared her throat. From this point forward, Leah, any further communication regarding this matter goes through counsel. You are no longer part of the internal case team. Leah looked at me like she was waiting for mercy. For years, I would have given it. I would have made room for fear, for weakness, for the emotional complexity of shared history. I would have told myself that people raised inside manipulation did not always know how to resist it. I would have done unpaid emotional labor to help the person who harmed me feel less terrible about it. But I was finally beginning to understand that boundaries are not cruelty. They are truth with a door on it. You need to leave, I said. She rose slowly, shoulders shaking. At the doorway, she turned back. Aunt Colleen also said something else. Every nerve in me sharpened. What? Leah swallowed hard. She said if the property freeze held Grant had a backup plan. Something involving old maintenance records, a missing insurance rider, and making it look like the house itself had title irregularities under your oversight. Tessa swore under her breath. That changed everything. The lake parcel had been the obvious target. Whitaker House had been the emotional center. But if Grant and my mother could create confusion around title stewardship, they could muddy my authority stall, the trust fight, and recast me as the reckless administrator, endangering all family assets. Which meant Leah's betrayal had not only leaked strategy, it had given them time to launch a second attack. The temporary defeat arrived the next morning. A courier delivered notice that an emergency petition had been filed, alleging negligent document handling under my administrative supervision and requesting temporary review of the trust and related property records, including Whitaker House. The language was carefully chosen, not a direct accusation of fraud against me, not yet. Something subtler, something designed to create doubt, delay, and social damage. My mother had learned from years of hosting charity galas and church fundraisers that respectable destruction rarely starts with screaming. It starts with concern. Concern that Nora had been overwhelmed. Concern that she had become obsessive. Concern that in trying to control everything, she had let critical records become compromised. By noon, the whispers had returned. Not as strong as before the party. Not enough to erase the video, but enough to muddy the emotional water. 2 relatives who had texted support went silent. A board member from one of my father's community foundations asked Reese whether I planned to step back for rest. My mother had already started feeding the city its favorite story, the competent single daughter cracking under pressure. And then my father disappeared. He was not missing in the criminal sense. He had simply left the house before dawn, ignored calls for hours, and finally surfaced at an old marina where he used to go when he wanted to avoid conflict. By the time I found him sitting in his car staring at the water, I was beyond anger. You signed the statement, I said through the open driver window. You knew what they were doing. He did not look at me. I did not know how far it would go. That sentence is the anthem of weak men. He closed his eyes. I should have been gentler. He had suffered a stroke. He was old, ashamed, exhausted. But the family had spent decades asking me to soften the truth for other people's comfort, and I was done making honesty prettier than it was. They are trying to put this on me, I said. Again. I know, then come home and say it publicly. He gripped the wheel tighter. Colleen says if I testify openly, the bank will destroy us. I laughed then. A short, joyless sound that startled even me. She is still speaking in plurals. She destroyed us already. He finally looked at me. She is your mother. I stepped back from the car, and that was supposed to protect me. I left him there. That afternoon felt like the lowest point of the war. Leah was gone. My father had folded inward again. My mother had shifted the narrative just enough to complicate the case. Grant had created a procedural distraction that threatened to buy them time. Even the house felt different, less like a battlefield, and more like a mausoleum of all the excuses I had once accepted. Tessa found me in the butler's pantry at dusk, sitting on the floor between shelves of serving platters my mother never let anyone chip. You are not losing, she said. It looks a lot like losing. It looks like they were ready for consequences and had a second layer prepared. I leaned my head back against the cabinet door. I trusted Leah. She sat beside me on the tile without caring that her suit would wrinkle. I know. There was a long silence. Then she said, This is what they count on Nora. Not just fraud, fatigue, emotional collapse. The hope that if they make the process painful enough, the honest person will choose peace over truth. I swallowed hard. I used to. "Do not tonight." I did not answer, but I stayed sitting there until the shaking passed. Some betrayals break the case. Others clarify it. By midnight, we knew 3 things with certainty. First, Leah was not the architect of our defeat, only the leak that sped it up. Second, my mother and Grant were willing to contaminate every remaining piece of family property to save themselves. And third, if we did not produce evidence so strong that no whisper campaign could survive it, they would keep trying to turn my competence into my guilt. What I did not know then was that the evidence already existed, hidden in a place my mother had overlooked, and it would be delivered to me by the last person in the world I expected to stand on my side. The new ally did not arrive with dramatic music, a perfect legal strategy, or some cinematic confession on the front steps. She arrived in a gray sedan that looked like it had seen 20 years of practical life, carrying a canvas tote bag and wearing walking shoes. Her name was Eleanor Voss. Most people in Savannah knew her only as the retired attorney who had drafted estate documents for half the old families in town before disappearing into a quieter life near Tybee. I knew her as the woman my grandmother trusted more than anyone outside blood. When I was 12, I once heard grandmother say, "If this family ever starts eating itself, Eleanor will know where the bones are buried." At the time, I thought it was one of those sharp old lady sayings grown people used when they wanted to sound mysterious. At 40, standing in the front hall with the house in chaos around me, I realized grandmother had probably meant it literally. Eleanor asked for tea before she asked for facts. That alone told me she was dangerous in the best possible way. People who do not rush are usually the ones carrying substance. We sat in the morning room while Tessa and Reese joined us with notepads. Eleanor opened her tote bag and removed 3 things: an envelope, a small hard drive, a faded blue file tied with white ribbon. My pulse started climbing before she spoke. "Your grandmother visited me 6 months before she died," Eleanor said. She had concerns. I looked at the ribboned file about the trust, about your mother, about favoritism, about the possibility that family charm might one day become family theft. Reese actually smiled at that. Eleanor slid the envelope toward me first. Inside was a letter in my grandmother's unmistakable hand, addressed to be delivered only if any family property was leveraged, sold, altered, or encumbered without unanimous written consent and formal review by successor oversight. Successor oversight. Me. My throat tightened as I unfolded the pages. "Nora, if you are reading this, then someone in this family has confused blood with ownership. If that day comes, do not ask whether exposing them is disloyal. Ask whether allowing theft to wear the mask of kinship would dishonor every woman before you who built something men later assumed they could control." I had to stop reading for a moment. Grandmother had seen it. Maybe not every detail. Not Grant, not the shell vendors, not the exact shape of the fraud. But the pattern, the entitlement, the danger of being the capable daughter in a family that mistook reliability for surrender. Eleanor waited until I steadied myself. "The blue file contains the original trust restrictions, including the addendum your mother claims never existed. The hard drive contains scanned correspondence meeting notes and dictated memoranda from your grandmother's final review sessions." She wanted redundancy. Tessa let out a low breath. Reese was already reaching for gloves and evidence sleeves. "Why did you keep all of this hidden?" I asked. Eleanor's expression did not change. "Because your grandmother did not want a war started by suspicion. She wanted a war ended by proof." That sentence changed the temperature in the room. We spent the next 4 hours reviewing what Eleanor had brought, and each page felt like a door slamming shut on my mother's defenses. The original trust addendum named me successor trustee, not merely in the event of death or incapacity, but in the event of attempted unilateral use, concealment, or document manipulation by any direct descendant. It specifically referenced the Lake Parcel and Whitaker House as protected holdings subject to enhanced review if challenged by family members with financial conflicts. There was more. A dictated memo from grandmother described a private conversation in which my mother argued that assets tied up in sentiment ought to serve the living daughter who knows how to use beauty and marriage strategically. Grandmother's response had been blistering. The memo concluded, "Colleen mistakes attraction for stewardship, and Isabel has learned from her. Nora must never be isolated from the paperwork." Eleanor watched me absorb that and said, "Your grandmother was not sentimental about human nature. Neither, it turned out, had she been careless." The hard drive contained video depositions she had recorded for estate clarification. In one of them, filmed in her library with a blanket over her knees and contempt in her eyes, she said plainly that the lake parcel was never to secure debt for Colleen's vanity projects, Isabel's social positioning, or any man charming enough to make fools of them both. Tessa looked almost delighted. "That is not just helpful. That is devastating." It was, but the strongest piece of evidence was still waiting. Inside the blue file was a notarized instruction letter to Eleanor, sealed and witnessed, authorizing immediate disclosure of all retained trust materials if any party attempted to blame me for document mishandling or title confusion. My mother's backup plan had triggered the exact safeguard grandmother built to destroy it. For the first time in days, I felt something close to oxygen return to my lungs. Reese moved fast. She prepared supplemental filings before lunch, attaching certified copies, chain of custody statements from Eleanor, and a motion challenging the emergency petition as retaliatory bad faith litigation. Owen matched the trust language to lender disclosures, proving the collateral use should never have passed preliminary review, if original restrictions had been honestly presented. Tessa cross-linked the Shell vendor flow to the property manipulation timeline and highlighted the clear motive for hiding the addendum. And then Eleanor added one final gift. "I also brought the insurance rider your mother claimed was missing," she said. My head snapped up. She placed it on the table. Whitaker House had a historic property rider filed years earlier under grandmother's instruction. It referenced custodial records, archive storage, and preservation obligations, all supervised under the same trust umbrella. In plain language, it tied the house records to the trust structure my mother and Grant were now trying to confuse. Their title irregularity story was finished before it began. By mid-afternoon, Reese had turned our temporary defeat into a counterstrike. But evidence alone does not win until people carry it into the places that matter. So the new alliance widened. Eleanor agreed to sign a sworn declaration and appear, if needed. Reverend Thomas updated his statement in light of the newly recovered documents. Leonard Price expanded his cooperation and identified a final set of misclassified vendor withdrawals. Owen submitted a formal lender escalation packet that made institutional denial much harder. Even Anika, the junior bookkeeper, found the courage to forward an old voice note from Isabel saying, "Just move it under development prep and keep Nora out of it until after the party." That voice note was worth gold. Still, one piece remained emotionally unresolved. My father. I found him in the back garden just before sunset, standing beneath the camellias my grandmother had planted the year I was born. He looked smaller than ever, but when I handed him a copy of grandmother's letter and waited in silence, he read every word. His face folded inward line by line. She knew he whispered, "Yes." "She trusted you." "Yes." He sat heavily on the stone bench and covered his mouth with one hand. For a long moment, I thought he might cry. Instead, he said the thing I had waited years to hear, though I had stopped expecting it. "I let your mother use your strength as if it belonged to the family by default." The pain of that sentence was sharp because of how simple it was. No speeches, no excuses about stress or peacekeeping, just truth. "She taught Isabel that charm would be forgiven," he continued, voice rough. "And I taught you that endurance was love." I sat beside him, but did not rescue him from the silence after that. Finally, he turned to me. "Tell me what to do." I looked at the man who had once felt larger than every room now reduced by weakness, habit, and regret. I could not give him absolution, but I could give him a task. Come to the hearing. Tell the truth without shrinking it. He nodded once, and this time he did not disappear. The hearing itself was not flashy. Real collapse rarely is. It happened in a quiet room with wood paneling, legal folders, stale air, and people whose authority did not care how charming my mother looked in pearl earrings. Reese presented first, calm, precise, merciless. She walked the court through the fraudulent collateral use, the retaliatory emergency petition, the recovered original trust materials, the chain of concealment, and the attempt to shift blame onto me. She submitted grandmother's video clarification, Eleanor's declarations, Leonard's accounting support, and the voice note from Isabel. Owen testified to the lending implications. Tessa summarized the financial pattern. Then my father took the stand. I will remember his testimony for the rest of my life, not because it was eloquent, but because it was late honesty. Finally choosing not to hide. He said he had not authorized the use of the lake parcel. He said my mother and Grant had pushed him to sign papers he did not fully review. He said I had repeatedly raised concerns and been dismissed. And then when asked whether he believed I mishandled the records now in dispute, he looked straight at the judge and said no. My daughter is the only reason there are records left to fight over. That broke something open in the room. Not legally, spiritually. My mother's face went rigid with fury. Isabel stared at the floor. Grant leaned toward his lawyer, whispering fast. But the center of gravity had shifted for good. The judge was not theatrical. She did not lecture anyone for 10 minutes or thunder about family values. She simply reviewed the evidence, asked 2 hard questions about concealed restrictions and retaliatory timing, and then ruled that the emergency petition lacked credibility, that the preserved trust documents strongly favored my authority, and that further review of the financial misconduct would proceed with heightened scrutiny. Grant's backup plan was dead. My mother's narrative was dead, and for the first time since the engagement party victory, no longer felt theoretical. It felt inevitable. Once the ruling came down, the rest did not happen all at once. It happened the way old houses collapse after termites, one support giving way, then another, until everyone can suddenly see the damage was structural all along. Grant was the first to fall in public. The lender froze the line tied to the lake parcel and referred the matter for deeper review. 2 development partners suspended their agreements with him pending investigation. April Gaines, the journalist Reese, had kept on quiet standby, published a tightly sourced piece on regional billing irregularities and trust property misuse linked to a prominent engagement scandal. She did not write like a gossip columnist. She wrote like a surgeon. Respectable, documented, impossible to shrug off. Within 48 hours, Grant's reputation stopped being a private family embarrassment and became a business liability. Men like him survive on confidence extended by other men. Once that confidence cracked, his entire polished identity started shedding pieces. Contractors came forward about delayed payments. A former assistant disclosed off-book billing instructions. One investor demanded a forensic review. Another sued. He sent me one final message. You could have settled this quietly. I stared at that sentence for a long time before deleting it. There it was again. The philosophy of people who do harm and call silence maturity. My mother's collapse was slower, but somehow more complete. Social circles that had once fed on her approval began starving her out. The women who copied her holiday tables and whispered her judgments at charity auctions suddenly became impossible to reach. A museum board quietly requested her resignation. A church committee thanked her for past service and announced a restructuring that did not include her. Invitations stopped, calls slowed. Sympathy dried up once the documents started circulating beyond the family. The terrible truth about prestige is that it feels like love until consequences arrive. She tried 3 final strategies. First, martyrdom. She told anyone who would listen that she had only acted to preserve family legacy during a stressful season, and that I had cruelly weaponized legal technicalities against my own mother. Then victimhood. She said Grant had manipulated Isabel and bullied her into signing things she did not understand. Then reconciliation theater. She sent me a handwritten note about sorrow, misunderstanding, and the terrible loneliness of mothers whose daughters harden against them. I did not reply. I had spent enough years translating manipulation into softer languages. Isabel was harder to predict because beneath all her performance, she had always depended on other people to decide which version of herself would survive. At first she blamed Grant entirely. Then she blamed our mother. Then she blamed me for humiliating her instead of protecting her privately. One afternoon, she appeared in the office doorway of Whitaker House, without warning, thinner than before, face stripped of makeup, looking less glamorous, and more like a woman who had finally run out of mirrors. "I did not think it would go this far," she said. I kept signing papers. That sentence has become very popular around here. Her mouth trembled. I was trying to keep up. "With what?" She laughed weakly, and for the first time in my life, it sounded like someone had cracked the shell and found panic inside. Everything. The image. The expectations. Mother saying beauty opens doors, but only if you marry before people start asking questions. Grant promising that once the development closed, all the cash strain would disappear and we would replace everything before anyone noticed. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I looked at her then. All those years, I had thought she was my opposite. The adored one, the easy one, the sister who floated where I carried. And in many ways, she had been. But she had also been built in the furnace of my mother's ambition, taught that her value was in being chosen displayed, envied kept. It did not excuse what she did, but it explained the architecture of her ruin. "You still laughed," I said quietly. "You still planned to blame me." Her eyes filled. "I know." "Do you?" She did not answer. That was answer enough. I did not throw her out. I did not forgive her either. I simply told her that any future conversation between us would require truth without self-pity, and that until legal matters concluded, she was to communicate through counsel like everyone else. She nodded and left, looking smaller than the house had ever allowed her to seem. The legal consequences unfolded over the following months with satisfying, unspectacular force. Accounts were reviewed. Vendor trails were untangled. Restitution claims were prepared. Grant faced civil exposure from multiple sides at once. My mother was formally removed from any authority touching the trust or preserved family assets. Isabel entered a cooperation arrangement to reduce her direct liability after providing communications and access records. Leonard was cleared of wrongdoing. Annika kept her job and got a raise from me the week the review stabilized. As for Whitaker House, I made the decision no one expected. I did not sell it. For a while, many people assumed I would. They thought I would cash out the poisoned inheritance, leave Savannah, and build a life where nobody knew what my maiden name cost me. There were nights I wanted that badly enough to taste it. But the house was not the problem. The myth inside it was, so I changed the structure. With Eleanor's help and Reese's oversight, I reorganized the governance around the preserved properties and charitable holdings into a stricter stewardship model, with external review, transparent accounting, and no informal family discretion. No more charming conversations in dens. No more key envelopes passed over coffee tables. No more emotional blackmail dressed as legacy. If anything wearing the Whitaker name survived, it would survive under light. My father moved into the carriage house for a season while his health stabilized. We were not healed. Healing is too romantic a word for what existed between us. We were rebuilding from exposed foundations. Some mornings we drank coffee in silence. Some afternoons he told me stories about grandmother I had never heard, because my mother preferred living narratives over dead women with opinions. Once, as we watched a storm roll over the back lawn, he said, "You should have had a family that protected your honesty." I looked out at the rain and replied, "I am building one." And I was. Not from blood alone. Maybe not from blood at all. Tessa became the first person in years who called me late at night for reasons that had nothing to do with crisis and everything to do with trust. Reese, after winning what she privately called the most satisfying manners and fraud case of my career, began showing up for Sunday dinners with takeout and dry humor. Marisol accepted my offer to manage household operations with full authority, proper pay, and actual respect. Anika joined us for one holiday meal after admitting she had nowhere else she wanted to be. Even Eleanor, who pretended she disliked social gatherings, began taking tea with us once a month and correcting everyone's legal vocabulary. Leah wrote me twice. The first letter was full of explanation. The second was shorter and better. No excuses, just acknowledgement. I answered only the second one. Briefly, trust once broken for convenience does not regenerate on sentiment. But I wished her courage. Sometimes, that is the most honest form of mercy. As for my mother, she moved into a smaller townhouse across town after several financial realities made the old performance impossible to sustain. We speak rarely. When we do, the conversations are formal, weathered, and clear. She has not apologized in a way that reaches truth, and I no longer need her to. That might be the deepest revenge of all. Not humiliation, not public exposure, not even justice, though. Justice matters. Freedom. The kind that arrives when the people who taught you to earn love by enduring harm discover you no longer report to that system. A year after the engagement party, I stood on the lake parcel at sunset with a small group of people who had become more family to me than blood ever managed. Tessa had brought terrible wine and excellent cheese. Reese had kicked off her heels and was arguing with Eleanor about trust reform language no one else could follow. Marisol was laughing so hard at one of Annika's stories that she had to set down the picnic plates. My father sat in a folding chair near the dock, quieter, now humbler, watching without trying to direct the scene. The land was still ours. Not because I saved it alone, because I finally stopped saving the people trying to strip it. I looked across the water and thought about the woman my sister mocked in that ballroom. The one with no husband, no children, no soft focus proof that she had been chosen by the right kind of life. For years, I had secretly feared they were right about me in some way I could not name. Too sharp, too much, too difficult to love unless useful. But standing there surrounded by people who had stepped toward truth instead of away from it, I understood something with painful clarity. I was never too much. I was simply raised among people who needed me small enough to exploit. And once I refused, their whole story collapsed. If you made it to the end of my story, thank you for staying with me through every lie, every twist, and every hard truth. I would really love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever seen family loyalty used as a weapon to hide betrayal? And do you believe karma always catches up, or does justice only happen when someone finally speaks? If this story moved you, shocked you, or left you feeling that sweet kind of satisfaction when truth wins, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes boundaries are not cruelty. Your support helps stories like mine reach the people who need them most. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, and wherever you are tonight, I hope you protect your peace, trust your instincts, and never confuse surviving a family with owing it your silence.